Hi, I'm Eric, and I'm back with another video. There's a lot going on today, a lot going on in the world right now, and I'll be commenting on some of the recent events that have been occurring, which are really ratcheting up international tensions to heights that are really unimaginable. However, what I want to talk about in this video is something a little more personal, a little more mundane, you might say, and although it does have a bearing on these issues. And that is the fact that on May 9th, um, 2025 was the 80th anniversary of the Victory Day of the Soviet Union over the Nazis in World War II. The reason why this is personally important for me is because when I was a kid, my grandmother, who had grown up in Lithuania, which was part of the Russian Empire, told me at one point when I was a kid, I was like 9 years old. She said that there were a number of pictures of her relatives on a mantle, and I said, "Who are they?" She said, "They're my family." I said, "So where are they?" She said, "They're dead." And I said, "Well, what happened?" She said, "Hitler killed them." So I realized, and at the time I thought, what if they come back? And what we are seeing now is exactly this kind of reemergence of these, racist, fascist, violent, brutal groupings that were present in World War II. They were collaborators with the Nazis during World War II, and now they've basically taken over in Ukraine. And so I felt that to support the Russian Federation in its fight against the resurgent Ukrainian Nazis, who were these are the same people that were murdering my family, and so that's how I feel about it. So I decided to go to Moscow, and it was a very interesting trip. I had originally planned to go there for just a month. My idea was to go to Moscow for Victory Day, then go down to Volgograd to visit a couple of friends there, take a trip to Yalta to visit a friend of mine, Regis Tremblay, who's a really good friend of mine and has been a indefatigable peace activist and filmmaker for a couple of decades at least. Um, and then I was going to swing back up to St. Petersburg to visit another old friend of mine. But the plan really it didn't work out that way. But it's okay. So I'm just going to run through exactly what the sequence of events were in this trip. So the first thing I wanted to say was that I need to fire my travel agent because I wanted to get the cheapest round trip ticket I possibly could from Chiang Mai, Thailand, back up to Moscow, and then back again. And I booked a ticket, which took it was like it was on a Chinese airline, Hainan Airlines, and the flight was it was pretty good. So I took a flight from Chiang Mai to Bangkok, and then a Bangkok on this Chinese airline, Hainan Airlines, and that was about a 6-hour flight from Bangkok to Beijing, China, and then there was another roughly 6 or so hours or more in Beijing, and then there was another 6 to 7 hours, something like that, to Moscow. The whole thing took me a total of about 30 plus hours. And you can imagine by the time I got to Moscow, I was pretty wasted. Fortunately, I had made plans with a friend of mine named Don Corder. Now, Don is a reporter for RT, and RT is it's basically like the BBC in Britain. I think if you're a Russian citizen, you do not have to pay a tax to support RT, but in the BBC, you actually have to pay a fee, as I understand it. You British citizens can correct me if I'm wrong. You actually have to pay a fee to the government to support public broadcasting, which unfortunately the BBC has turned into the BS broadcasting company. I mean, you can't recently there was this guy, a very, very esteemed former British diplomat named Alistair Crook, who gave a commentary, and I'll be talking about him. I've posted something which showed his discussion, and he says, the BBC, it's just, it's propaganda. You can't believe anything coming out of the British government. They're just the British government earned the sobriquet perfidious Albion centuries ago. You just Perfidious means you simply cannot believe them. They're just habitual liars, and that's the BBC. RT, on the other hand, I asked Don what his opinion was of working for RT, and he said he's never had um, any editorial control over his content by the people who run RT. And I've heard that from other Americans. The RT America actually was banned in America. It's like free speech America. They banned Russian TV because the people who are there are Americans, giving their personal opinions and doing their own research and doing their own programming, and the U.S. government doesn't like it, so they shut it down. This is for free speech America. So RT has got its station is in Moscow, and there's an RT in Arabic, and there's an RT Germany, and an RT I think in France. I think they're still operating. I'm not positive. I know the German one and the Arabic one is, and you can get RT in English, and they have a lot of very interesting, stories. And from what I could tell, they have their critics, but I think they're reasonably credible. And Don is a decidedly leftist person. He's ideologically associated with communism and Marxism, and he's not a member of the party because in Russia, which is a bona fide party in Russia, because as a journalist he's not supposed to have an affiliation with a political party. Um, so, but he has editorial control about what he writes about and what he speaks about, and he's doing extremely well there. So I got to Moscow at about 6 p.m. on May 4th, and he had arranged for a taxi to pick me up at the airport and take me back to his apartment. And he lives in a quite a nice apartment. I think it's got a pretty decent sized living room. It's got an office space. It has a bedroom where he's living with a very lovely Russian young woman who is I forget, she's working for some corporation. She says, oh, it's just another corporation, but they're in love and they're gonna get probably he I won't go any further than that, but they have a very nice relationship from what I can tell. Um, and in any case, um, he so he invited me to stay at his house for a couple of days, and but he had to work. He's an employee, and one of the things that he has free time when he has it, but he's on call. So if there's a news story that has to be reported on, they say, Dawn, go cover this story, and it could be anywhere in the world, literally. So there I was in Moscow, and the first day I was on my own, and I did a couple of things. No, actually, let's see. I rested for a couple of days, and then on May 8th was the day before the big Victory Day parade, and there was a rally of what I gather is the Communist Party of the Russian Federation. And the head of the party there, named Gennady Zyuganov, was there, and he gave a talk, I met various people there, but I ran into this guy named Pepe Escobar, and Pepe Escobar is this. He's been doing journalism covering essentially Asia, the Asian continent, for 40 years, and I've followed him for years. I'm a personal friend of his, so I was kind of standing around, and I say, Pepe, hey, how are you? He goes, Eric, how are you? He says, oh, my Zen monk friend. I said, oh, you're my Taoist monk friend. And so we have that kind of relationship because he has a very holistic view of the world, and he's been doing fantastic reporting on the crises in Ukraine and in Gaza and all over Asia. So I highly recommend that you follow him. So in any case, he told me that we were going to try and meet up later, but that didn't work out because he travels in circles that are he's like he meets the highest people you can meet in Russian government military circles, which I don't. So, but that's okay. I also wanted to meet two other people who came. One is Ray McGovern. Ray McGovern has been he was an intelligence officer with the CIA for 27 years. He used to give the daily briefing to, I think it was Ronald Reagan, and so he's tremendously knowledgeable about U.S. foreign policy. He speaks fluent Russian. He helped negotiate the first arms control treaty that was signed in Moscow in 1972, and he was there for the signing of the treaty. So he's a very, very knowledgeable person, and I would consider him to be probably the greatest authority on U.S. and Russian relations there is alive today. And so he was there. And Oliver Stone, who is a movie maker, I'm sure you're familiar with him. He was also in Moscow. I wasn't able to meet either of these guys because, they're traveling in circles that are far above mine. I just hang out with mostly ordinary Russian citizens. So there I was. That was on May 8th, and then May 9th. What happened was Don said to me, "Look, I'm working. I can't have you stay in my apartment, for days on end. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send you. This is Don speaking. He says I'm going to send you to my friend's house, and he's a lawyer for an organization. I guess it's an organization called the Left Front, and the Left Front is a left-wing organization, which is I guess you could say that they feel that the Communist Party is too lenient on the political milieu, so to speak, in the Russian Federation. And so I went to this party with these. First, Don had me go to a North Korean restaurant, and of course, North Korea is the worst country in the world. Terrible place. You never want to go there. But from what I hear, it's actually not so bad. Here's this country that was grossly. It was like what 30% of the population was killed in the Korean War. There was hardly a building left standing north of the 38th parallel, which was the dividing line that was negotiated under duress at the ending the so-called Korean War, which incidentally the U.S. instigated by installing a dictator in South Korea in order to prevent the nationalist Koreans from taking over after they kicked out the Japanese. Because you see, any country that stands up to U.S. hegemony is considered a mortal enemy and can't possibly do anything right, and so that's what North Korea is depicted as. So we went to this North Korean restaurant, and I met a lawyer for the Left Front, and they've done some useful work preventing I guess development in certain areas that they felt needed to be protected, things of that nature. So I went. And this guy happened to have he owns a country house outside of Moscow called a dacha, and this is a very common phenomenon. A lot of Russians have this what is called a dacha. It's a country house, and it's in a kind of like a subdivision. So you have to go outside of Moscow, and then there's a gate. It's kind of I wouldn't call it a gated community exactly because people have their own houses on maybe an acre or so of land, something like that. And so there I was, and they said I could stay as long as I wanted. So I was there. I got to their place. I got there at I think it was in the evening, kind of maybe like 9 o'clock or so, and then some other people showed up, and we had dinner at midnight, and then at about 2 o'clock in the morning, I kind of hung it up and I said, okay, that's it, and we all went to sleep and then got up the next morning. Now the Victory Day took place. The actual event took place starting at about 10 a.m. in the morning, and although the internet connection there wasn't that great, I was able to tune in to hear Vladimir Putin's speech, and this was on RT, so it was simultaneously translated into English, so I got to hear what he had to say, and and then there was the parade, and the whole event took place. It took place over the course of about an hour, and then people started showing up, to this guy's house, and I met a few interesting people. There were young families with children. There was an older couple that I met, and one of the guys in particular was named Sergey. He doesn't speak any English, or very, very, maybe a smattering of words. My Russian is negligible, and so we communicated through a phone app. That is, if you have a mobile phone, you can get you can get a translation app. So you got this app, and you click on what languages you want. In this case, it was translating from my English into Russian, and I would click on a little icon for a microphone, and I would speak into the microphone, and then in like 5 seconds later, up would come a written translation into Russian, and also you could click on something to hear the Russian spoken in English, that is spoken in Russian, so that we were able to have a pretty decent conversation. And what I discovered was that his understanding of what I call objective history is essentially identical. So it was interesting, the fact that here I am, somebody coming from a background of the United States and living in Thailand, and he's somebody who grew up in the Soviet Union and is living in the Russian Federation, and yet our understanding of objective history is essentially identical, and our views on what the world is like today are essentially identical. I found this in the case of other people that I've spoken with in Russia as well, and in rare cases with foreigners. So the point here being that there's like two alternative news narrative worlds. One of them is the BBC, CNN, New York Times, Washington Post world, which is essentially what is deservedly called the Empire of Lies, and there's the actual objective history of what actually has been going on. So a good example of that is in the current conflict in Ukraine, Russia invaded Ukraine unprovoked. That is the narrative. And the secondary part of the narrative is that Russia is losing badly and Ukraine is winning, and all we have to do is pump a few more $1 billion of aid and weapons into Ukraine, and Russia is going to have to concede, and its economy is going to be in tatters, and so Russia will be humiliated and they'll learn their lesson. Well, exactly the opposite is true. What's actually happening is that starting even at the end of World War II, the kinds of people who there were actual industry collaborators within the United States that supported Nazi Germany. Prescott Bush, the grandfather of George W. Bush, the father of George H.W. Bush, both of them are president, He was the banker for the Nazis. And Allen Dulles, first head of the CIA, was a collaborator with the Nazis. So deeply embedded within U.S. Political class are some very, very nasty people. And they were basically supporting Ukrainian allies of the Nazis during World War II. And after World War II, they were protected, and many of them went to Canada. One of them got a standing ovation in the Canadian Parliament for fighting Russia during World War II, and the Canadian parliamentarians forgot that actually Canada was fighting on the side of Russia during World War II. We were not enemies, but they forgot about that because the Canadian government has been infiltrated by these Nazis who came over from Ukraine to escape from the revenge of the Soviet Union and the Soviet people who had been, you know, brutalized by them for years. Okay, so that's what I mean by there's a common understanding among people who actually know the history about what went on, and most people in the West have not gotten that. They do not know any of that history, and as a result, they're seriously misinformed and they've taken the wrong side. So that's that. Um, Now, as the party was, there probably about, I would say, maybe 30 or so people there, and they served a lot of delicious food. There was bread. There was they grilled pork and chicken and things like that, and there was a lot of there was wine there. There was a lot of vodka floating around. And I'm not a drinker, so that doesn't it just it's not an issue. I'm not really interested in that. Um, but as time went on, I could tell that some people were getting fairly sloshed, and then what happened was Don has a friend named Nicholas, and Nicholas is engaged to and soon to be married to a Russian woman named Lena. Lena is a professional singer. So she started singing songs with this Russian guy who brought along his accordion, and so they're singing Russian songs. And I know a couple of old movies from old Russian movies. And I say, hey, do you know the song from Guest from the Future? And they say, oh, let's see. Oh we'll look up the lyrics and we'll sing along. And so they were singing songs and that was all really great. And he's, and both of them are trained professional singers, so they have really, really good voices. And let's see what happened then. Another kind of vignette was that there was this guy there named Peter, and Peter has a mouth harp. It's one of those things that it's kind of shaped. Um, it's a funny shaped instrument with a piece of metal that you pling like boing, like that. And so whenever somebody was playing a song, he would play along with his mouse harp. And he said, Eric, I want to give you a mouse harp as a gift. And I said, well, he says, this is my form of meditation. I said, well, actually, I've got my own form of meditation. I like it, doing what I like, and I don't really need to do the mouse harp. The mouth harp. He says, no, you really got to do the mouth harp. So I said, okay, I tell you what, if you're willing to do 10 minutes of Zen meditation, I will do 10 minutes of learning how to do the mouth harp. And he wasn't able to get through the 10 minutes. After 3 minutes, he got distracted, but I managed to bring him back down, back to earth, and get through the 10 minutes, which I felt was not really. He kind of cheated, because he didn't really do the full 10 minutes straight. You got to be able to concentrate for 10 minutes. But one of the biggest problems we have in modern society is that people's attention span is so messed up that they can't even sit down and shut up for 10 minutes. So that's that. Anyway, so he gives me this, this thing with this plinger thing, and it keeps hitting my teeth, and my teeth are not in the greatest shape, and I was afraid of, breaking a tooth. So I said to Max, who was the host, "Hey Max, here, why don't you take it?" He says, "No, no, no, I don't want it. It's yours." So I was kind of stuck with it, at least for the time being. And then the issue of chanting came up. And because of my years of training as a Zen practitioner in the temple, we would chant, and we would, when people sing, there's kind of like people can sing either from up here like this, or if you remember in the 60s, people would sing in the falsetto. But in the Zen monastery, you would chant from a deep place like this. And so Max says, "Oh, you've got to do some chanting." I said, "Well, it's already midnight, and I'm getting pretty tired here." So he said, "No, no, no, you got to do some chanting." And I said, "Well, I'd really rather not." And then what shows up is a big gallon jar of water, but it's not. It's like a big, big gallon jar, and there must be at least four liters or 4 quarts of this clear liquid. So I said, "Well, so what did you do? You brought, did you bring some water to this party?" He says, "No, no, no, that's moonshine vodka." And I'm thinking, "Oh my God, I am not going. This is beyond my lifestyle spectrum." So I said to them, "Look, I'm an old man. I cannot do this. I need to go to sleep now. I'm sorry." And they said, "No, no, stay, stay, stay." I said, "Thank you, das vidanya." What is the word? What's the word in Russian for spokojna noche, which means, rest, have a nice rest at night, something like that. So I excused myself, and I just thought I got to get out of here because this is not. I cannot stay up until 3 in the morning and expect my health to hold out. So I went to bed, and then the next morning I woke up, and I thought, I think I need to find another place to stay. They were all very gracious. The food was good, and I have, no problem with any of that. But, I'm just not a drinker. I'm not a smoker, and that's just how it is. Now there were other people there who were very interesting, and they were one woman is an academic. She's a lecturer at a university, and she's got a YouTube channel and a Telegram channel, and I've stayed in contact with her. And I met this fellow Sergey and his wife, very 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 fine couple. Um, so um, so the Russian people that I met were all really really great. Um, it's just that in some cases, I'm not part of that kind of alcohol and smoking culture, which is it's not, you don't see it as much as you used to. From what I understand, younger generation Russians are a lot more of them are interested in health foods and exercise and things like that. So that's in my opinion, that's a good sign because I feel like that's important. Um, so so anyway, I decided I think I need to just find another living situation. So and of course everybody else they were dead to the world for probably until mid afternoon. So I packed up my stuff, which is about it's close to 50 pounds actually, because I had one large bag that you store in baggage in the airplane, and there's a limit of about 40 or so pounds that you can store on the airplane, and then you've got a bag that you can take with you on the flight itself, and then they allow you to have it like a satchel with your essentials, your passport, and things like that. So it came to a total of about 50 pounds, and fortunately I was able to and the ground, of course, the ground. This is a The road was not in great shape, and it was very hard on the wheels of my baggage. And my baggage itself has been through a couple of years of difficult travels, and it's not in great shape myself. So I just basically put it all on my back and took the other bag that's about 10 pounds, put that on my front, carried the satchel with the other stuff. Comes to a total of about 50 pounds, and I walk out towards the highway. And unfortunately, at about 8 o'clock in the morning, there's an iron gate that blocks there's the highway that's going by. The subdivision is behind the highway, and you have to go down a little road about maybe 50 yards or so through an iron gate to get into the subdivision. And there I am, and of course it's locked. So I thought, I got to get out of here. So I just basically there was a kind of a gap between the bottom of the iron gate and the road and the dirt road, and so I kind of pushed everything underneath the gate, and then I managed to crawl under the gate on my back, and then I called my friend Nicholas, who's a friend of Dawn, and Nicholas's wife Lena is the singer. I said, hey, I need to help me out here. So he said, okay, you can stay at my house for a night, and then we'll find you a place to stay. So that's what happened there. And but then I also had I had more free time because both these guys work. So I went to this place called VDNK, which is an incredible park that was built during Stalin's time, and it was dedicated to the various Soviet socialist republics. So the Soviet Union is thought of as a one monolithic thing, but it wasn't not really like that. It was kind of like the United States, where you have separate states, but in the case of the Soviet Union, you actually had different Soviet socialist republics part of the Soviet Union. And one of them was the Belarusian Soviet Socialist Republic. There was the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. There was the Uzbekistan Soviet Socialist Republic, the Kazakhstan Soviet Socialist Republic, and so on. And each of these had a pavilion, featuring the production, the cultural and other productions of each of these Soviet Socialist republics. And so you got a sense of this. This is a multicultural country. And just to give you an idea, for example, most of the Soviet Union, from a religious standpoint, had its basis in Russian Orthodoxy. So the Russian language was instituted through an Eastern Orthodox priest, and they basically created Russian Orthodoxy, which it's a branch of Christianity. But some of the other republics are, for example, Dagestan or Tatarstan, or in the case of the Soviet Union, Kazakhstan. A lot of the people there are Muslim. But you also have a couple of Buddhist republics. So there's a place called Kalmykia, and there's another place called Buryatia, and those areas have people who they're not Slavic people. They're they're their own ethnicity, but they basically have autonomy, and that's how they are able to practice their religion. Now it's true that during Soviet times, there was it was not all roses and balloons. There was some repression of these groups, because the Soviet Union was basically trying to the West had always had it designed on destroying Russia. So after when World War I ended, essentially what happened was the Russian Empire was fighting in World War One, and the the they were losing badly. There were many losses, not just Russian but also Germans and French and British, and there were mutinies among the troops, and some of those were among the Russian troops. And of course Lenin came along, and he said his program was peace, land, and bread. And so he eventually, after the initial Russian Revolution, which overthrew the Tsar, but wanted to maintain the war, wanted to keep the war going, Lenin said, "No, we really need peace, and we're willing to give up territory in order to get it." So they signed something called the Brest-Litovsk Treaty, and made a lot of people angry because they considered areas of Ukraine part of Russian Empire, which it had been, and so you had the so-called White Russians, who were mainly more the traditional Russians, upper class Russians, who were definitely opposed to what the Soviets were doing, and as a result, they attacked the Bolshevik revolution, and they also asked their Western allies, the Americans and the British, the Japanese, the French, the Czechoslovakians, a number of countries basically attacked the new Soviet Union. And what I find really telling is the fact that the Russian army was losing in World War One, but when it came time for when the Soviet Union was being attacked by all these different countries, they mobilized their population and they kicked them all out. So that tells you something about, what motivates people to fight. Did they want to fight a war for an emperor? Because this is basically a war between imperial powers, or are they willing to fight for their own country that they wanted to build up and escape from the clutches of these upper class people who are willing to send poor illiterate peasants off to die. They didn't want that. So that was a major factor in how the Soviet Union came about. But the West was determined to take it down, and the United States didn't even recognize the Soviet Union until FDR came to power in 1934. So, Stalin, who came to power after Lenin died, said to the Soviet people, we know what the West wants. We know that they want to destroy us. They want to get control of our resources, and they don't respect our way of life. And we have to prepare for this. And many of the Russian people, didn't understand that, and so there was internal dissension, and it was there was some repression because of that, although far less than what the West claims. As an example, the Soviet Union is accused of killing tens of millions of its people, when in fact it was the West that had done a food embargo, and people were starving inside the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union was cut off from food supplies, and it was sanctioned. So the farm sector was suffering. They weren't able to even buy food, and so several million people died. But they blame the Soviet Union for killing their own people, when it's their embargo and their war against the Soviet Union which caused the problem in the first place. So if a country invades your country and accuses your country of killing their people because of your invasion, that was the foreign policy of the West towards the Soviet Union during the 1930s. So that's, people need to get the context right of what's actually been going on. And the reason why I bring it up is because the current war in Ukraine is a replay of all that. Okay, so anyway, so I went to this place called Vediancha, and in the center of it is this It's a beautiful fountain, and it's got these golden figures, and it's called the the um, the fountain of the friendship of the peoples. So there's this idea of how do you create a harmonious society that's multicultural and with a common sense of purpose. And that was what the Soviet Union was all about. And the fact that they had these multiple nationalities, um, many of them didn't even have an alphabet, and yet the Soviet Union created an alphabet for them and created a gave the people a sense of pride in their own national identity as part of this larger conglomeration called the Soviet Union. So that was Vediancha. And let's see. Nicholas, so I stayed with Nicholas and his wife, and his soon-to-be wife. Um, and they live in a little apartment called a Khrushchevka. So one of the issues that the Soviet Union faced was a severe lack of housing, and they really wanted to, alleviate poverty, and they needed to get people a place to live. I think in Stalin's time they built, apartments, but people had to live several families to an apartment. That wasn't great. So at a certain point, Premier Khrushchev um, underwent this. He created this program of building millions of these Khrushchevka apartments, and I was staying in this Khrushchevka apartment with my friend Nicholas and his fiancee Lena. What is really kind of interesting about this is that I have a friend in a city in Ukraine which is under attack as I speak, and she recently bought a Khrushchevka that was built in I don't know, the 1960s or something. I don't know when it was built, but a long time ago. And she just remodeled it. I was on the phone with her on Telegram, and of course, the thing is, there's a tremendous amount of dissension, in Ukraine about this war, against Russia, and many people. It's like probably the majority of people in Ukraine speak Russian either as their second language or as their first language. Many people speak Russian as their first language, and they're Russian Orthodox people. They're culturally Russian, and this whole unfortunate event with Ukraine and Russia it was just artificially created by this divide and conquer Western method of creating division and creating conflict, and that's what this whole really tragic war has been about. But anyway, here's this woman who is she was raised during Soviet times, and she says she just can't wait until the Russians come and get rid of this stupid government that the United States installed in 2014, and that's the source of this whole that's the immediate cause of this problem. When people say, "Oh, Russia invaded unprovoked," no, it was Joe Biden under Obama who overthrew the democratically elected government of Ukraine in 2014, and the new government was persecuting people who spoke Russian language and persecuting the Russian Orthodox Church and bombing these people and committing atrocities and capturing people and torturing them for 8 years. And at that point, the Communist Party of the Russian Federation pushed through a resolution in the Russian parliament saying, Vladimir Putin, please do something. Stop this, because we know what they're going to do. They're planning a massive invasion to kill a million people. That is the plan. And fortunately, the Russian Federation Parliament, passed a bill recognizing the breakaway areas that had been under attack for 8 years, And at that point, they said, "Okay, we recognize you. You claimed, you guys in Donbass claimed that you're independent. We recognize your independence. You're asking us for help. We will help you now." So that is what happened in the 2022 initial stage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And for the United States to say that Russia invaded unprovoked when in fact the United States staged the coup overthrowing a democratic government is just, it's so hypocritical. It borders on psychopathic in my opinion. Okay, enough of that rant. So then it was the next step on my trip was to go to Volgograd. And I have a Russian friend in Volgograd who's lived in the United States. He speaks quite good English. He's a doctor, and he does forensic analysis. So if there's some kind of tissue that looks irregular, he looks at it through a microscope and he can determine, what kind of, is it benign, is it cancerous, what is, whatever it is. That's his job. And he's married to another doctor, and they have a young son, and they have an apartment in Volgograd. So, and now Volgograd was originally called, it was called Tsaritsyn, back before the Russian Revolution, but then it was called Stalingrad because Stalin essentially built up this city, which is a key logistics hub on the Volga River. And there was the scene of a terrible battle there during World War II, where a million Soviet soldiers and a million um, German and Romanian and Hungarian and other countries all fought over this city for I think about 6 months. Eventually, the Soviets defeated them, and this was the first really major defeat for the Nazis in World War II. And because of that, both of FDR and Winston Churchill and the King of England even sent their congratulations to the people of Stalingrad for their valiant fight against the Nazis. Because if they had lost, then there was a good chance that the Soviet Union would have fallen. And it's noteworthy that during World War II, both the former ambassador to the Soviet Union under FDR made a movie called Mission to Moscow, and he said in the introduction to the movie, the actual author of this book, the actual ambassador, introduced the movie by saying that if the Nazis had defeated the Soviet Union, they would have captured all of the Soviet Union's resources. Japan would have captured all of the resources of Eastern Soviet Union, and these two fascist forces would have been in such a dominant position that our own country would have been seriously threatened. It's quite possible that if the Soviet Union had fell, then England would have fallen shortly after that. So those were the dynamics that were going on during World War II, and of course none of this is ever discussed in modern Western history. It's all, the United States won World War II. No, the Soviet Union lost 27 million people fighting the not just the Germans, but the Germans and their allies. Another fact that isn't mentioned. Many of those allies are now part of the EU or part of NATO, and they all express this hostility to Russia, for presumed crimes that the Russians are guilty of, when in fact they're the ones with the history of 500 years of colonialism and oppression of people all over the world. But it's always somebody else's fault. Okay, so anyway, there I am in Volgograd, and I have another friend there named Sergei, and Sergei introduced me to some friends of his. He studies English, and I think he's like a chemist, a chemical engineer, and very smart guy. And he studies, as I say, he studies English with an American who teaches English in Russia, He's married to a Russian wife, and he's a very, very nice guy. And he's got a little son who he's just the kindest, nicest father you could ever possibly want. And then there was another guy there who's also an American who's living in Russia, and he's a strong opponent of U.S. foreign policy and domestic policy, and he's got a Russian wife and a little baby, and so we had an interesting discussion there. And then there were these two other women who are Russians, and they're English teachers, and I had a discussion with one of them, and then later on, I think the next day, we agreed to go on do kind of a tour, and I got to talk with both of them, and they're just the sweetest people, really, really nice. And so one of the things that we did was we went to we wanted to go to this place called Stalin's Bunker, which I guess was a kind of like a bomb shelter or something in case there was an attack on the Soviet Union after World War II. I think that's what happened. But it's a very, very popular tourist spot because, historical memory for Russians is important, and it's become more important as they realize what the stakes are in this current conflict that we're in. But that particular place was so crowded that we couldn't get a tour to go there. But it turns out that it was like a private apartment in a building, and there's a woman curator of this. It's basically it's like a one-room museum, and it has a lot of World War II artifacts. So it has like a German simulated bunker where Germans would hide out from being shelled and that kind of thing. And there was one where this was for the Soviets, and they had things like old German Coke bottles and German Nivea ointment, which I'm sure you've probably seen Nivea ointment. It's been around since World War II, and Bayer aspirin and these kinds of things. And they had actual hand grenades, and they had different kinds of machine guns. And I have a natural aversion to all of that. But when your country's under attack, what are you going to do? You're going to greet the Nazis with flowers and tell them to be reasonable. So this woman greeted us, and she was speaking all in Russian. And it turns out that her husband was a doctor in the current conflict in the Donbass in eastern Ukraine, and he was killed in an attack. And her son, who's 19 years old, was fighting, and he was injured, and he is recovering in a hospital. So these people know up front and personal what happens when you have a war. And as I've said, you can be opposed to war, but what do you do when war comes to you? Recently, Mark Rubio finally admitted. Mark Rubio says, well, actually, this is a proxy war of the United States against Russia. Well, thank you for telling us after 3 years of propaganda that it's all Russia's fault. It's a proxy war using Ukrainian blood to fight for American corporations. That's what it is. And then again, this guy, General Keith Kellogg, who has been used as an envoy in negotiations, was asked about the situation, and he said, well, actually, it's really a proxy war of the United States against Russia. So guess what? You're in a war against Russia. If you're an American or a European, you are in a war against Russia. That's the nature of the situation. So I was in Volgograd, and I was planning to get surgery actually there because Andre is my friend. He's a doctor. And he said he'd take care of me. I could stay at his apartment for as long as I needed to recover. But I saw the surgeon, and I just felt like it was more expensive than I expected, and I felt that by staying in this apartment, it's not a huge place. I felt that I was kind of like imposing on Andre. He was extremely gracious. His wife is very gracious too, but I just felt like, staying with this couple for over a month, it was just kind of too much of a burden. They've got a child to take care of. They've got their careers to take care of. They both have two jobs, and so I felt it was really kind of too much. So the next thing that I thought of was one of my friends in Moscow named Irina had I had told her that I was thinking of going to St. Petersburg, which is in the northern Russia, not too far from the Baltic countries. And so she had said, "Hey, you can go visit my friends in St. Petersburg, and I have another friend in St. Petersburg." So I bought a ticket to go to St. Petersburg, but then I discovered that my friend had planned for me to meet him in May, and my plan had changed. So he had already left to go to um, his dacha during the summer months, and it's already in the middle of June, and or it's in the beginning of June, and these other people, they went off on a summer vacation to Montenegro, so my ticket to St. Petersburg was kind of useless at that point. So I thought, okay, well, let's see what else is there to do here. And so my friend in Irina had two other suggestions for me. One was to go to Sochi, and Sochi it's on the Black Sea coast. It's a southern tourist area, and it's where there was the Winter Olympics had been held there. But during the summer months, it's very very comfortable. It's supposed to be beautiful, and they didn't have any place for me to stay, and my funds are limited, so I'm trying to find places where I can stay where it's not expensive. And they had suggested that I stay at a campground, which would be quite inexpensive. But then they told me that in fact the campground wasn't going to open for another couple of weeks, and that would have meant my staying in Volgograd for a longer period of time, and so I gave up on that idea. And then the other possibility was for me to go to this Buddhist province of, um, of the Russian Federation called Kalmykia, and it's basically Mongolian or Tibetan type of practice, but that's fine. I mean, I live in Thailand. They practice Theravada Buddhism, which is somewhat different from Zen, but they're all essentially same. There's slight doctrinal differences, and there's some differences in particular practices, but essentially it's the same practice, and so that's not a problem for me at all. It's all very exotic and beautiful. Um, but the issue was that there's supposed to be a conference there in September 18th to 20th. Well, as I speak, it's June 4th, and where would I stay in Kalmykia for over 2 months? June, July, August, almost over 3.5 months until this conference takes place. And I had asked Irina, for details about that, and she said she has friends who live there and they would like to meet me, but I hadn't gotten anything solid. So I decided to proceed to go to Yalta to visit my friend Regis Tremblay, and then the question is, what would I do? I postponed deciding what to do. So I went to Yalta, and Regis is 80 years old. He was trained as a Catholic priest. I was trained as a Zen monk. So even though our religions were different, um, the kind of monastic life that people have, depending on their religion, especially in this case between Buddhism and Christianity, is fairly similar. So we have a kind of similar attitude towards life, a kind of life view, so to speak. Even though we obviously both of us left, that kind of active practice, there's still that kind of commonality. And so he recently married a Russian woman named Tanya. And Regis is a documentary filmmaker. He's made several very, very important films, documentaries talking about war and the danger of nuclear war and these sorts of things. And so he said, Eric, please come down and stay with us. And I found I should say my Volgograd friend Andrei went online, and there's a Russian website where you can essentially rent an apartment, and it's much cheaper than renting a hotel. So he found this apartment, and it has an this when you have these websites, they're usually in different languages because people from different parts of the world, are looking for an apartment, someplace to stay. So, but it turns out that it has an English button, but it doesn't work. So, as much as I would have liked to, navigate this website to find a place to stay, it wouldn't work. So my friend Andre rented this place for me for several days, and then fortunately, because he has we use WhatsApp, which is it's a communication app. And so I was talking with Andre and talking with Nelly, my friend from Volgograd, the Russian language, the Russian English, the English teacher who's Russian, and then there's the owner of this apartment and his assistant, and we're all kind of messaging each other back and forth, trying to figure out all this kind of stuff. And eventually, after 3 days, I figured, well, I think I should stay here for another 3 days and then decide what my plan is going to be. So I stayed for another 3 days and negotiating using this WhatsApp thing. And so that eventually all worked out. But while I was there, Regis has made some really good friends, and one of them is he's an American guy who was active in the some kind of, I think, military technology area. But he had a kind of revelation about what the nature of U.S. foreign policy is, and he's also devout Christian, and he said he just doesn't want any part of what U.S. foreign policy is about. So he's coming here, and I think he's probably around 60 years old, and he's looking for a 30-year-old a beautiful Russian wife, and he's got the money to support her quite well, I'm sure. So that's one guy, Peter, and then there was another guy named Richard, and Richard is an older gentleman. He had some health issues, but I think there's a certain demographic within the United States where at a certain point we just realize, after getting all this information from all of these different news sources and CNN and the New York Times, and at a certain point we wake up and you say, this stuff is bullshit. They're just lying to us. They lied to us about Vietnam. They lied to us about Korea. They lied to us about Afghanistan. They lied to us about Iraq. They lied to us about Iran. They lied to us about the Soviet Union. They lied to us about everything, and we're just sick of it. And so some of these people, they just say, we just can't handle it. And there's a lot of expats, who've just said, we just can't deal with this kind of culture of lies. There was a book written in around 2000 or 1999 or so, right around that time, by a guy named Chalmers Johnson, and he had been a former State Department official, and he was a consultant to the CIA. So he was doing work, a lot of very good work on foreign affairs. And he wrote a book called Sorrows of Empire. And basically, he explained the fact that the what people are told is simply not accurate. And he said that his prediction for the country was that there would be a culture of lies, constant wars, police state, and bankruptcy. He wrote about that in around the year 2000. And, I read that book and I just thought, it kind of looks like that to me too. So, and I'm not the only one who thinks that way. So you have a number of people who have, real see the Western narrative for what it is, and we're basically desperately trying to alert people in our own countries to what is going on because as the recent events that are happening right now are it's just proving that that is all coming true. The dollar is falling in value. A year ago or a couple of years ago, the Russian ruble was I think it was 60 to the dollar, and then when the special military operation, when Russia invaded Ukraine and got a lot of sanctions against it, it was 100 rubles to a dollar. Well, just before coming to Russia, it was around 81 or around 81 rubles to a dollar, and now last time I checked is 87 rubles to a dollar. So it's lost 4 rubles, in just a couple of weeks, and it's losing value against the Thai baht as well. So this is an example of the very weak financial condition of the United States. In terms of the culture of lies, well, I've already explained, what's been going on with there. If you haven't figured it out already, a lot of people understand that the Trump administration has lied about everything. Trump said, "I'm going to solve this war with one phone call." Well, here we are, and it's completely the opposite. So that's culture of lies, constant war. That kind of speaks for itself. Police state, there's more surveillance going on, and I just got an email from somebody saying that they're concerned that like Facebook is surveilling people's posts, and people are afraid that there's a kind of a totalitarian curtain falling on the United States. And it was kind of hidden under a friendly smile, and we're the good guys, but more and more people are realizing that that's not really true. So, and as I say, in bankruptcy, is a real possibility. So I meet people like that in Yalta who are, you could say, what they're they're not comfortable living in the U.S. society as it is, or in Western culture as it is, and they're moving. The 2 young guys who are American English teachers don't want to raise their kids in the American culture, which can't. They somehow they've forgotten that there's an X and a Y chromosome, and people are being told that there's an LGBTQ chromosomes, and it's we're being raised in absurdity, and people, they just don't want that, so they're coming to countries like Russia or Thailand for that matter. So there was another couple that I met, friends of Regis. One of them is named Roger. He's a former businessman from South Africa, very, very nice guy, and his wife Olga, who is Russian, and she says she's Russian Orthodox and Buddhist, which I thought was, kind of interesting because, the thing is, what people need to understand is that we human beings, we all have, you could say, at least two things in common. We all have a brain, and we all breathe air, and those are like the two bottom line things about human beings. We all have the capacity to think, to talk. We breathe oxygen, and if you look at the what a human brain is, it has the capacity, it has multiple kinds of capacities, to create music, to do science, to speak multiple languages, all those kinds of things. We all of that in common, and and the purpose of religions is essentially because the amount of data that we as living beings are exposed to is so overwhelming that we need to create mental frameworks in order for things to work. So it's like with a computer, you've got this hardware, but you need an operating system. And operating systems vary from different kinds of computer. You can have a Linux, you can have an Apple, you can have a Windows, and different operating systems. And the problem is that people assume that their operating system is reality, and that one reality is better than another reality, and then they start fighting with each other. At least some operating systems have that idea. There are other operating systems that say, no, they're different operating systems and we can all get along. It's just that they're different operating systems, and we can learn to communicate between, just as an Apple computer can communicate with a Windows 11 computer. We don't have to have a war between an Apple's computer and a Windows computer just because they have a different operating system. And that's what religions are about. They're just different operating systems. It doesn't matter. What matters is, how do you use this tool to communicate and do the things that we want to do as human beings? That's all it is. So, so there's that. And then finally, towards the end of this, so I'm staying in Yalta, and Regis says to me, Eric, Sochi didn't work out, St. Petersburg didn't work out, your surgery didn't work out, you've got several months to go to Kalmykia. Eric, just go back to Thailand. And I thought, well, I could probably go to Kalmykia and stay there and hang out there for a couple of months, and I probably could have done that. But on the other hand, I wasn't really sure, and so, I respect Regis a lot, so I thought, yeah, you're probably right. I should go back to Thailand, get my surgery done here, and when I'm better, and then I can consider going back to Kalmykia. So the final part of this narrative here is this what I call the strange trip back from Yalta to Chiang Mai. And even Regis was mystified by this event. So I had to go in order to get to. So I'm in Yalta, which is on the Black Sea coast of the Russian Federation of Crimea, and Crimea, of course, is under sanctions, and Russia is under sanctions by the West. So you can't just fly from Yalta to Chiang Mai. You just can't do that. You can't fly from anywhere inside of Crimea. You have to take either a bus or a train, or it turns out to be a minivan. So I'm in Yalta, and I booked a bus ticket from Yalta, this peripheral city, to Simferopol, which is the capital of Crimea. And on the website, which my friend Andre introduced me to, which fortunately does have operational English capability, it said, so you want to go there, and do you want baggage? I said, yeah, I want baggage. He said, okay, fine, it's going to cost you another 10%. So for, what was it, about, it was about, I don't know, $20, something like that. It's a 2-hour bus ride. It wasn't even $20 that you get from Yalta to Simferopol. But then from Simferopol, I have to get to the airport out of Russia, which is in Sochi. So I booked a bus from Simferopol to Sochi. But when I printed out the ticket, it said bus ticket to Sochi, no baggage. So I thought, I got, 50 pounds of stuff. How am I going to get it back to Chiang Mai? So, and there was no way, and there was nothing on the website to add baggage. So I'm on the bus from Yalta to Simferopol. And I met this woman who was about a 60-year-old woman, and there's this other guy who was maybe about 20 years old who worked at a trade school. And they were interested in this American. We started talking through our app, because none of us speak each other's language very well. And so at one point I said to this woman, so you lived during Soviet times. On balance, how did you feel about the Soviet Union? I love to ask Russian people who grew up in the Soviet Union how they felt about it. And she just kind of looked up and the Soviet Union was so great. I was so happy that. And I'm like poking all of you, who've been propagandized and brainwashed for decades about how terrible the Soviet Union was. And so often people are very wistful about the Soviet Union, and they say life was actually better there then than it is now, because there was much less financial pressure on people than there is now. I mean, people got, the Khrushchevkas, people got free apartments. Can you imagine a free apartment? Guaranteed job security. Might not be the greatest job, but you've got something. You've got guaranteed income. You've got guaranteed education. You've got guaranteed health care. None of which is available in the free West. Free? Nothing's for free. You've got to pay through the nose for everything. So people, was the government as democratic as the U.S. is? Oh, we're democratic. Yeah, we get to vote for somebody who always tells us one thing and then does another. So what good is that? This is so we're sold a bill of goods over and over again. We get nothing for it. At least in the oppressive Soviet Union, at least you didn't starve to death or be stuck out in the street the way hundreds of thousands of Americans are now in the United States. And they're talking about, oh, we're gonna have a new dome, we're gonna have a wonderful thing, where we can all live. The Russian word for house is dom, but in Donald Trump's America, we're gonna have a golden dome. It's a golden dome. We're gonna have a dome which is going to protect us from intercontinental ballistic missiles, and it's going to cost hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars, and hasn't got a flying blankety-blanks chance of succeeding, because Russian technology is so far outclassing American technology that they have missiles that travel at multiple times the speed of sound, can evade radar and evade anti-ballistic missile defense systems and hit their targets. They can hit the They can hit the missile. They can hit the anti-missile missiles. So, this whole idea of this golden dome, please, people they get sold this bill of goods again and again and again, and they believe it because, oh, Trump is so wonderful, or oh, save us from Trump. The Democrats are the ones who will save us from Trump, even though the Democrats got us into this mess in the first place. And then you've got Bernie Sanders, who says, oh, the oligarchs. Well, what have you actually done to nationalize the Fed, which is controlled by private banks and is screwing you left and right, or Obama, who bailed out the banks instead of the homeowners in 2008, and it's never gotten any better, but you still keep voting for the Democrats because, oh, they're going to save us from Trump. You know, you grow up. It is not going to happen that way. Anyway, I arrive in Simferopol, and my young, the lady, she has to go off and do her other stuff. But this young guy says, I will, you know, I'll help you out. So we go to the ticket counter, and he says to the ticket lady, I want to upgrade this ticket so that I can include baggage. And the woman says, I don't know anything about that. So I'm thinking, well, what am I going to do now? Because the ticket is for 10 p.m. at night. It arrives at about 10 o'clock in the morning the next day, and then there's about a 5-hour difference between when I arrive in Sochi and the flight back to Chiang Mai. Well, but she doesn't know what to do about the baggage. So I call my friend Andre. What do I do now, Andre? He says, well, you can pay off the bus driver, and you know maybe he'll accept your baggage. So I say, okay. I say to my friend, this young guy and his friend, I say, let's go get some dinner. I'm gonna, you know, because you're helping me out here. Let's go to dinner. And we went to a restaurant. We order a pizza, but before we went there, um, we stop off at this parking lot where there are a bunch of minivans, and there's a minivan there. And he said, oh, okay, you got baggage here. Okay, here's the deal. You pay me 1,000 rubles, which works out to be about $12, and I will take you from Simferopol on a 10 to 12 hour bus ride, or in this case minivan ride, to Sochi. Now, the bus ride normally would cost somewhere about $80, and my friend Regis simply couldn't believe, understandably, that a minivan would take me to Sochi on a 10 to 12 hour bus ride for like $12, $15. So what I think was happening there was that this guy, he has a minivan. He wants to get back to the Sochi airport because that's where he really makes his money. People are trying to get from the Sochi airport to someplace else. And so he was willing to just I was like a free ride for him. He knew that I had already paid money for this bus ride, and he said for an extra extra $12, I'll take you and your baggage to Sochi. So I probably lost it worked out to be about $80 or so, unfortunately for my bus ride. It's conceivable that I could have gotten a refund if I had had access to a website that would allow me to do that, but I'm on my mobile phone. It's the logistics of doing that are difficult at best, given the fact that my Russian language ability and the fact that I'm not even on a website, a functioning laptop or desktop website. All I have is my mobile phone. So, and I just thought, if I can take a minivan, I've got a guaranteed way to get there. And when we had to go over the Kerch Bridge, which is that this bridge it just got attacked again. And I was worried about, getting over that bridge. And I thought, if I can leave, 4 hours earlier, that gives me more safety time, so that if there is a delay, then I've got 4 extra hours in case there is a problem. So that's what I did, and then we got to this Kerch Bridge. I was all kind of wondering, is this too good to be true? I get to the bridge. We're at the investigation gate. There's a dog. There's a guard there with a dog. The dog is sniffing around. They tell me, take out your baggage. One of the guys there is to help. One guy, I think he's probably from one of the Central Asian republics. He's not Slavic, but Central Asian. He helps me with my bag to take it out to be x-rayed to make sure there's nothing wrong with it. We all go through it in like 10 minutes, and we're on our way, no problem at all. If I had taken the bus, it would have taken an hour, at least a half an hour or an hour for 40 people on a bus, or at least 40 people to be checked to go through uh, the um, the inspection area of the Kerch Bridge. And in fact, we ended up getting to the Sochi airport. The guy took me door to door straight to the Sochi airport, and I had a lot of time on my hands, which I didn't mind. I actually got a little bit of sleep waiting in the airport, so it all worked out very well. So then I get on the flight to back to Chiang Mai, and the first flight is from Sochi to Dubai, and that was about a 4-hour flight. It went pretty uneventfully. It was just a typical airplane flight, nothing special. But we got a little snack, stuff like that. And then there was another, I think about a 2-hour layover, which is not too bad, on a flight from Emirates Airlines. And I wanted to just talk about this and give a little plug for Emirates Airlines, because I'm not a great fan of the Emirates. These are, they're autocratic. The sheiks, they're loaded to the gills, and they have ads on there talking about the life of luxury. And I think, I'm a working class type of person. I don't buy all this luxury stuff, but they served a really good dinner, and they had snacks, and you could even order wine for free if you wanted it. I didn't order wine, but you could. And they had their entertainment section has, it's like all kinds of sports, weather, status of the trip, but they had lots of movies, and they had science fiction movies, and they had comedy movies and action movies and movies, Indian movies and Russian movies and American movies and French movies and Italian movies. And so you had the greatest choice of movies you could ever possibly watch. And so I thought, okay, well, I'm not a real fan of modern Hollywood movies. I think they're all kind of garbage. But let's see what they have in the classic movies. And there were two movies. One of them was Casablanca with Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman, and the other movie was For Whom the Bell Tolls, starring Ingrid Bergman again with Gary Cooper. And what I really liked about both of these movies is that in the case of For Whom the Bell Tolls, it's about this American guy who's fighting in the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s. And they say to him, "You're an American. What are you doing fighting here in Spain?" And he says, "I'm fighting fascists, because if the fascists win, we're all going to be in serious, serious trouble." And sure enough, he succeeds in blowing up the strategic bridge, but he gets severely injured, and of course, he and Ingrid Bergman have fallen madly in love with each other, which is completely understandable, because he's a good-looking guy and she's gorgeous, and she's just so sweet. She's a wonderful, this 19-year-old girl who was captured by the Spanish fascists and raped, and her family was killed, and all of this stuff was actually happening in real. And at the end, he is severely injured, and he says to her, her name is Maria. He says, "I will always be with you. I'll always be with you." And so he stays there, and he's got his machine gun, and he holds off the Spanish fascists, allowing them to escape. So it's all very romantic and tragic, but this kind of stuff actually goes on. And then the second one I watched was Casablanca, which is a similar theme, where Humphrey Bogart plays this guy. He's a cynical, cabaret and bar and nightclub owner, and the Casablanca is under the it's nominally neutral, but it's under severe control by the Nazis, who've taken over taken over France, Vichy France, and a leader of the resistance from Bulgaria has made his way to Casablanca. He's trying to escape to America, where he can continue his resistance work, but he had but it was assumed that he had died in a concentration camp, and his wife, Ingrid Bergman, meets Rick, this American guy, and they fall madly in love. And at a certain point, um, they have to, he has to escape because they know that he catches the last train out of France, to from Paris to Marseille, so he just barely escaped from the clutches of the Nazis. And it turns out that he was actually, he was supplying arms to the Ethiopian government that was trying to hold off the fascists in Ethiopia during the 1930s, and he was also probably fighting the fascists in Spain. So kind of similar to what Gary Cooper in For Whom the Bell Tolls was doing. So you have this kind of both these movies were made in 1943, and you got this kind of undercurrent during the World War II of what the real priorities are of America's real mission is, and it's not to get filthy rich, it's to protect average people from fascists. That is what it's about. And Chris Hedges, who's a great commentator, says, he says, "I don't fight fascists because I think I will win. I fight fascists because they're fascists." And unfortunately, what people are just beginning to understand is that we are living under a stealth fascist regime here in the West overall, and it's more visible with Trump, but people who vote Democrat, the Republicans think that the Democrats are fascists, and the Democrats think that the Republicans are fascists, and what they don't realize is that they're both fascists. So that's kind of wrapping things up here. I got back to Chiang Mai. I was exhausted. I got sick. I'm still, you can still hear some congestion, but I'm getting better. And so this is kind of a longer than normal rant of mine, but I felt I needed to really kind of go through everything that happened in that, and give due kudos to the people who helped me out on that whole trip, because I got a lot of help from people, and I'll decide whether I'm going to go back to Russia to this Buddhist conference in September. I'll see how I feel. I'll have to get more information about that, and of course, here I am in Thailand, and I'm going to have to get some medical treatment done. So that's that part of it. Just in conclusion here, I'll just mention at the bottom of my videos, I have several ways that you can support my work. As you can guess, doing this kind of travel is it costs money, and I'm living on a pension, so it would really be helpful if you could either. You can go to click on one of my stores where you can buy an information billboard T-shirt, such as this one, Question Everything, or you can just make a donation at PayPal, or you can make a donation at Buy Me a Coffee, or you can sign up for my Substack. So that's basically all I have to say for today. Thanks again for listening for this long rant of mine. If you've actually made it this far, then what can I say? I'm eternally grateful to you. So thanks a lot, and I'll talk with you again soon.